Particularly with relation to my sister's wedding, I would want to let my family know what transpired with me. Months of eating have been consuming me, and at last it's time to take care of this. To provide you some background, I'm Emily, and Ben, my 12-year-old son, has gone through a lot in the last few years. My family has always been close-knit, or so I thought, until everything collapsed when my sister Carol got married. Carol and I have had conflicts in the past, but nothing that seemed insurmountable. We grew up really close, but as we grew older, life interfered. Carol concentrated on her social life and job while I had a family. We sank apart over time. The wedding invitation came as a surprise, not because Carol and I weren't talking, but rather because I didn't expect her to extend an invite to me in the first place. I wasn't the only one to notice the disconnect either. For some time, particularly following Ben's accident, there had been conflict between us. Our family was going through a trying period, and although Carol had been initially helpful, things changed when she began making comments that were cruel and callous. You see, Ben had a major accident a few months prior. He became wheelchair dependent and had delayed rehabilitation. All of us found it difficult, but Ben, who had always been vibrant and energetic, especially so. But Carol seems to find it difficult to appreciate the seriousness of the matter. She remarked on how uncomfortable her wedding would be if Ben attended in his wheelchair. She seemed not to be attempting to be hostile, but it still stung as the wedding day drew near. Things between us deteriorated. She hadn't said it explicitly, but the inference was clear. She wanted Ben neither in a wheelchair nor at the wedding. When I questioned her, she tried to minimize it, stating instead that the venue and the mechanics of it all mattered rather than Ben. Still, I felt as though the matter was being swept under the rug. I couldn't let it go and decided not to show up for the wedding. I was first ashamed. It was the wedding of my sister, and I wanted to avoid starting family strife. But I grew increasingly unhappy as the days went by. Her treatment of Ben and her disdain of his needs let me recognize that this was not only a wedding logistics problem, it was about respect, or lack thereof. My parents reacted poorly when I told them I would not be attending the wedding. They claimed I was exaggerating, and that Carol was quite entitled to make decisions on her own wedding. Certainly they were correct as well. It was her wedding. She could invite or refuse anybody she chose. But their response really troubled me. "I don't see why you're making such a big deal out of this," my mother remarked, feeling as though they were choosing sides and excusing Carol's behavior rather than appreciating how terrible it had been. That was the realization that I wouldn't be getting any backing from them. Carol is simply trying to make her day unique, and we shouldn't be adding pointless drama to it. In this, I was on my own, and to be honest, I wanted nothing to do with the wedding anymore. I was quite okay if Carol wanted me away. The way my parents were handling the matter, though, greatly troubled me. Although Carol had a right to arrange her wedding any way she thought appropriate, I certainly had a right to be offended by it. That was my choice if I felt I should cut off contact with her. I felt as though I was not doing anything inappropriate. I felt, if anything, like I was defending Ben. I had decided immediately to discuss what had transpired with her husband, Kevin. When I told my parents about this, they became even more irate. If I were going to be accused of starting drama, I could as well straightforwardly explain the circumstances to him. "Why must you complicate things so much?" my dad questioned. "This is just a wedding, and you're making it into a whole thing." I didn't see it that way. It was about family, respect, and how we treat one another for me, not only about a wedding. Perhaps I wanted to stop living with Carol if she couldn't grasp it. It stung, and I could already see the distance widening. By then, though, I knew I had to put my own well-being first, and that meant separating myself from those mistreating my family and me. That day I left the residence of my parents, feeling both frustrated and relieved. I stopped attempting to clarify myself to them. Though I had done all I could to get them on my side, it was obvious they were not ready to see, and I was not going to ask for their help again. That evening I discussed it with Adam, my husband. What had happened not startled him. Having watched Carol's behavior for months, he agreed that I had every right to be firm. "I'm proud of you for standing up," he remarked. "This has more to do with their treatment of Ben and you than only the wedding. You cannot let them walk all over you. His comments meant the world to me. I thought I had someone on my side, someone who knew how much this was stressing me. Adam had always been there for me. His encouragement was the one thing that helped me to make sense of this whole mess. But things didn't stop there. Just as I felt I had left the whole scenario behind me, Carol chose to make an unanticipated contact. And then was when everything truly started to spin out of control. I was still working through things when the unanticipated occurred. 2 weeks after I had chosen to distance myself from the wedding turmoil, Carol called. Late in the evening, I was sitting on the couch with Adam going over some old pictures of Ben before the accident. The phone rang, and I didn't know the number. It was one of those quiet, introspective times when I tried to remember the lad who used to run around the yard, always so vibrant and alive. I almost missed it since I briefly considered it might be a spam call, but I knew to respond from something inside me. Though I had no idea why, I did. Emily? On the other end, the voice sounded quite clear. It was Carol. Her tone revealed a hesitancy not before heard. Yeah, it's me. What's happening? Try to keep your voice neutral, I said. Given all that had happened, I wasn't sure how to approach this. She began. I've been thinking, and I sensed she was frightened. I wanted to reach out even though I know we haven't been chatting much. Regarding how the wedding went and how I handled you, I have been feeling guilty. Ben also. I was insensitive as I see it now. I'm sorry. To say I was surprised would be an understatement. Having gone through all that, I really didn't anticipate an apology. With the gulf only expanding, I had been ready for things to remain as they were. Here she was, sounding vulnerable, owning that she had messed up. I didn't mean to hurt you, she said, her voice gentler now. Not knowing. I suppose I was so engrossed in my own world, organizing the wedding, that I failed to think through how it might affect Ben or you. I let her comments sink in for a time before answering. I was wrong. To be honest, I felt nothing at all. Though another part of me remained furious, part of me wanted to forgive her and go on. I answered, trying to keep my emotions under control. I appreciate you calling, angry at how she had handled Ben, angry at how my parents had overlooked the matter, and angry at myself for even letting it get to this point. But Carol, it goes beyond the wedding. It has to do with your feelings for Ben and me. You know, the remarks on his wheelchair were not something I could ignore. There was a stop on the other end of the line, and I could hear Carol inhaling. She seemed to be struggling with her next words. She answered at last, I know, and I have been kicking myself from then. I had no idea how much that hurt, how much it actually changed you. I am sorry, Emily. Those are not things I should have uttered. I was thoughtless. The apology felt sincere. Her voice carried it, and for the first time in a long time, I felt as though perhaps we might go past this. Still, I had to tell her straightforwardly. We cannot ignore everything like nothing had happened. Thank you for saying that, Carol, I said, not exactly straightforward. Still, I'm hurt. I need time to sort through this. You cannot simply hope that everything would return to normal overnight. I understand, she answered fast, and I'm not demanding instantaneous fixes for everything. I wanted to get in touch to let you know I recognize my error. Though I want to try, I know I cannot change what happened. There was silence for a minute, and in that silence I understood I was clinging to something more than the wedding. I want to make things right if you would let me. It was about all the tiny things that had accumulated over the years, not only about what happened in that instant. Our relationship had been gradually disintegrating. Maybe this was the wake-up call I needed. Maybe it was time to let go of the resentment and try to rebuild something, even if it meant beginning over. Let's talk in person, I replied, surprised myself. Having this chat in person makes more sense. I am not promising, though, Carol said, understanding. Thanks, Emily. We hung up and I sat there for a minute, allowing things to calm down. I will be reaching out to arrange something. Adam looked to me, worry etched on his face. So what then? His voice was hushed as he asked. I don't know, sincerely. I expected her not to apologize, but it goes beyond the apologies as well. It's about how things develop from here. He nodded with a reflective look. I am behind you whatever you choose. I smiled softly, appreciative of his support. "If you need me there." "Thanks," said I. "I will need it." The next several days were a rainbow of emotions. I gave some thought to my relationship with Carol, what had gotten us to this place, and what it could take to mend things. I considered Ben, and how, regardless of circumstances, I couldn't allow someone to treat him like an afterthought once more. My first concern was always Carol. Her call had opened a door, but it was up to me whether I chose to pass through it. Not sure whether I was ready. I still needed time to recover, and I wasn't sure the damage could be reversed so readily. Still, there remained a part of me that yearned for belief that things may be different. Carol remained my sister after all, and family, no matter how difficult, still meant something to me. A week later, Carol contacted us once more, this time proposing we get coffee. I so agreed. It was time to meet personally and work out what we might recover from the debris of the preceding few months. The background hum of mild conversation and cup clinking filled the still coffee shop. Not knowing how I felt about this conference, I arrived early. I watched the door as I swirled my coffee, the steam rising in tiny wisps. My mind was a mess of ideas. Part of me wanted to think Carol's apology was true, while another half was still unclear if it was enough. I could tell Carol was anxious when she at last arrived. She began, "Hey," her voice quieter than usual as she slid into the seat across from me. She was dressed casually, jeans, a simple top, and a cardigan, and her smile was hesitant, almost apologetic, like she wasn't sure how to approach me. My heart was thumping somewhat quicker than I had anticipated. There was much unsaid between us, and we hadn't spoken like this in months. For a minute, we both just sat there, not quite sure where to start. The air felt thick, heavy, like a storm building. Looking down at her hands, Carol fidgeted with the handle of her mug and guessed. She started, her words coming out more naturally this time, like she had practiced them in her thoughts 1,000 times. "I suppose I wanted to say again how sorry I am. I truly regret how I handled you. I know I messed up. I neglected to consider how it affected you or Ben. I was so preoccupied with my own affairs and perfecting everything for the wedding." I nodded, sipping slowly from my own cup and allowing her words to sink in for that as well. "I am really, truly sorry. About the anguish, the frustration, the loneliness, about the part of me that wanted to yell and tell her everything I had been holding back. I did not. I am unable to. Rather, I let out a deep exhale, trying to keep my cool. I don't know if you realize this, Carol, but it wasn't just the wedding," I continued, keeping a calm voice. "Everything leading up to it is just like this. About Ben, the way you handled him. There was more than one error. Little and large, it was a sequence of events that accumulated over time. I'm not sure whether you even noticed it." Carol's eyes sank to the table, and I could feel remorse in them. Silent for a minute, she seemed to be absorbing what I had said. Her voice was gentler when she at last spoke once more. "You're right," she said. "I looked not to see it. And looking back, I find it unbelievable that I didn't. I find it hard that I let things continue in such a manner. I have spent many nights awake, considering what I did. The points I mentioned, though I wish I could, I am unable to go back. I wish I had been a better sister to Ben or you. You deserved better." Her comments really struck me more than I had anticipated. It was not only the apology, but also her manner of saying it, as she seemed to really know the weight of her behavior. Although I had heard apologies before, this one felt different. "I don't know how to fix everything," she said, looking up at me with a vulnerability I hadn't seen in a long time. It was about everything that had gone unsaid for so long now, not just what happened at the wedding. Still, I would want to try. I want to be right at your side, Emily. I want to be a better aunt to Ben and a better sister. One step at a time, I want to set things right even though I know I cannot change the past. I took another big breath and allowed the silence to stretch out between us for a bit. For so long, I had been clinging to so much hurt and wrath that I had no idea what to do with it all, now that it was at last being acknowledged. As it happened, I wanted to pardon her. I did, exactly, but I trembled. "I don't know if I'm ready to forgive you yet," I replied, the words coming out more slowly than I intended. Scared of being hurt again, scared of putting my trust back in someone who had let me down so many times already. I still am enraged, Carol. I'm not sure whether I can simply let all of this pass. Still, I'm open to trying. Though it's just little steps, I'm eager to explore where we might travel from here. Carol nodded, softening her face. She replied, I get it. I wouldn't expect everything to be perfect overnight. I wanted to let you know I am here and that I am dedicated to improving. For Ben, as well as for you. The weight of her words hung in the air, and for the first time in a long time I felt something change. I do not want to lose you as my sister. Though not by a long shot, it was a beginning rather than a whole fix. A small one, but a beginning nonetheless. Okay, I murmured, the word feeling like a hesitant step forward. Starting with that, let me say one step at a time, we sat there for some time drinking our coffee in comfortable solitude. Though for the first time in months I saw possibility, there was no magic fix or quick resolution to all the years of conflict and miscommunication. Though it required confronting the past head-on, a sense of maybe things may improve. By the time we left the coffee shop, it wasn't like everything was magically fine, but it was not the same. I sensed a change, a fracture in the wall I had erected around myself. And possibly for now that was sufficient. Perhaps, very possibly, we could begin to rebuild. The days after our meeting were peaceful, even dreamlike. When I thought about Carol, there was no great tension, first in months. Rather, it felt as though a weight had been somewhat lifted, sufficient for me to breathe a bit more easily. Still, the path to restoring confidence was neither quick nor easy. I knew that. Things were first uneasy. I would hesitate every time Carol texted or gave a call. My fingers seemed unable to determine whether to type back or simply ignore the mail. Still, I wanted to avoid slipping back into the same avoidant habits. I wanted to afford her an opportunity. I responded thus. Sometimes the texts were brief, like, "Hey, how's it going? Thanks for checking in." And that was fine for a while. It wasn't like we were leaping back into sisterhood straight away. There were still walls, still traces of ancient suffering all around, things we couldn't simply wipe out. But we started modest. We began with the little things, the ones that didn't feel particularly dangerous. One day, Carol texted me asking whether I wanted to come over and hang out, just the two of us. Just a laid-back afternoon, no grand ideas or particular celebration. I first considered declining at first, particularly without some major event to divert us. I wasn't sure whether I was ready to commit that much time to her. I consented, and that afternoon, I found myself in her living room sitting on the couch with a cup of tea in hand, the air between us lighter than it had been in months. This was precisely what I needed, a chance to just be with her, without the cacophony of everything else. For some time, Carol had been silently watching a movie, something cheesy and nostalgic that she had put on, the kind of silence that wasn't uncomfortable, simply. After some time, Carol broke the quiet and remarked, "You know, I've been thinking a lot about what you said the other day, about the wedding and everything." She stopped, staring over at me. "I'm sorry, Em. I've been thinking about how I got so caught up in all the details. I didn't see what was really important. Actually, I am. I should have been here for you more often." I should have listened. Her comments no longer shocked me. It was starting to be a recurring motif for us, but this time it felt unposed. It came true. And even if I wanted to hang on to my wrath, the part of me weary of clinging to the hurt started to soften just a little. "I know you're sorry," I continued, voice steady but honest, "and I am aware of your trying. It is simply, Carol, I wish not to return to the past as it was. I do not want to act as though nothing occurred. We cannot just reset and wipe everything." She gestured. "I get that. And I don't want to act as though it doesn't matter. I won't give up on correcting things, though. I will walk you through acts rather than only words." She grinned, but it was a little uncertain, like she was waiting to find out whether I would agree. I found myself wanting to believe her. I indeed did. I suppose that's all I can ask for right now. Actions speak louder than words, right? The rest of the afternoon, we talked about nothing significant. Carol once took out an old photo album, and we went through images from our early years, birthdays, holidays, and trips. We chuckled at the ridiculous things we had done, and the inner jokes only made sense to us. For a brief period, it seemed as though a piece of the past had come alive once more, and it was easy to overlook the barriers separating us, though it wasn't flawless either. There were times when I caught myself holding back. That is, when I would stop myself from speaking or when I would momentarily flash old wrath and rapidly push it down. At least we were once more in conversation. At least we were making a try. Things stayed modest and uncertain for the next few weeks. 2 or 3 times we had dinner together. Occasionally I would text her about something arbitrary, like a song I like or a movie I had seen. Though it was little, it felt like we were once more building something, even if it was slow. Ben inquired whether we might visit Carol one day. He had been pleading for weeks, and to be honest, I didn't want to turn him away from spending time with his aunt. I nodded, so yes, but I felt anxious. It wasn't that I didn't trust Carol with Ben, it was just that there was still so much uncertainty between us, and I wanted nothing to go wrong. The comfort of everything shocked me when we arrived. Running straight to Carol's living room, Ben dropped down on the floor and showed her the new game he was playing. Like nothing else had ever changed, she laughed and joked with him. For a minute, I forgot about the past. Simply the 3 of us spending time together. But I couldn't help but observe Carol's attitude toward me as the trip progressed. It was comprehension, not sympathy or guilt. She was not rushing me. She could feel the weight of all I was still clutching. She was not exerting any effort. She was only there. And more than anything else, that was what I needed. I could see the hope in her eyes, the unsaid longing that we were approaching normal after we left that day. And I allowed myself hope too, for the first time in a very long time. Perhaps this was how it was done. One little step at a time. Not any major disclosures or sweeping shifts. Only small events, gently, silently, beginning to heal what had been damaged. I was not ready to pardon her totally, not now. But I was starting to think that true forgiveness, something that happened all at once, was not something that occurred. Like a seed dropped in the ground, it developed over time. Should you water it and show patience with it, perhaps one day it might blossom into something better. And for now, that was plenty. Weeks became months, and between Carol and me, things started to feel more normal. Though I wasn't expecting miracles, the consistent improvement, along with the small adjustments, gives me optimism. Though I kept reminding myself that this was not a quick fix, the more time we spent together, the more I came to see how profoundly everything had impacted us both. It was very evident that neither of us would be leaving this exactly unaltered. I was reading through some work emails on the porch one afternoon drinking coffee when Carol texted me. "Can we talk?" was the straightforward question. I did not hesitate. It was one of those times when you feel as though something is about to change, but you are unsure whether it would be better or worse. I set down my phone and went to her house, grabbing my jacket. Carol was seated at the kitchen table already when I got there. There was a subdued strain in the air, the kind that indicates a conversation is approaching that might not be simple but is unavoidable. Breathing deeply, I pulled out the chair and sat across from her. She said gently, "I'm glad you came," her voice bearing weight I hadn't heard in some time. "What's up?" I asked, my voice open but wary. I had discovered that often the most significant conversation might start with the most basic question. Like she was considering her words, Carol inhaled slowly. "I have been thinking a lot about us," she said, "about the past year, about everything that went wrong between us. I know I've apologized a million times, but I don't think I have really expressed what I ought to have." I waited first, not speaking at first. In times like these, I had come to see that perhaps quiet was the best gift you could provide. Though I needed her to speak from the heart, I did not need her to straightaway heal everything. That summarizes it. Carol said, "I think I lost sight of what really mattered, what we mattered, on trying to keep everything together, on making sure everything was perfect. I did not listen to you, not the way I ought to have, and I want to stop running through apologies for it. While I cannot alter the past, I can alter my present presentation. For you specifically. For Ben as well. I sensed a change in the air between us and inside of me. Her apology was more than simply a statement. It was the manner in which she was owning her shortcomings, the way she was not seeking pardon but rather providing understanding. I know I let you down and that you find it difficult to hear this. I have misled us. She turned to face me then, her eyes seeking something. I just wanted you to know I'm working on it, not only to mend our relationship, but also because I want to grow personally. She seemed to have pulled aside the last of the walls separating us, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt as like I was actually seeing her. Not only the sibling who let me down, but also the woman actually attempting change. I back off trying to understand her. This differed. This went beyond a few kind gestures or words to let the hurt pass. It focused on development. It was about owning the faults and working hard to improve. I had needed to hear that. Finally, my voice solid, but quieter than I had anticipated. I added, I know it's not going to be easy, but I feel ready to start working with you on this too. Though we have plenty to cover, I believe we can make it work. Slowness. Carol's eyes softened, and for a split second we just sat there silent. Though the weight of the past never disappeared right away, the future seemed somewhat more promising. We talked the remainder of the afternoon about the small things that had always kept us close, not yet about the major events. We discussed our old favorite shows, the meals we loved while young, and our memories of holidays spent with our parents. Though there were still gaps between us, ones we both knew would shrink over time, it felt as though we were creating something fresh together. Later that evening, I returned home rather whirling in my head. It was the sense of forward movement, not only the discussion itself. I forgot how crucial it was to go with the flow, to believe that things may change if I allowed them. I had spent so much time trying to preserve myself. I neither expected Carol nor could change everything at once, but I was seeing that rebuilding was not about perfection. It was about showing up for one another, especially in trying circumstances or when it felt embarrassing or unclear. It was about deciding daily to attempt. Carol texted me early the following morning. It was nothing more than a picture of Ben, contentedly fiddling with a fresh puzzle he had acquired. She said, "I'm so happy I'm able to spend more time with him, and accompanied by you." I grinned and sent back a thumbs-up emoji. I had little to say more specifically. That was a sufficient gesture. At that moment, I understood things were different. Not all at once, but in little, quiet, real ways. And maybe that's how mending operated. It wasn't about one great deed, one moment. It was about the little steps, daily efforts to be better, showing up, reconstructing what had been lost. And I felt hopeful, for the first time in a long time. Days after that chat with Carol seemed different. Old grudges and unresolved problems still weighed, but there was a sense of space now, a breathing room where things may gradually be reinterpreted. It was progress, and that was plenty for me. It was neither instantaneous nor flawless, not only because of obligation, but also because we truly wanted to see each other consistently. Carol and I began engaging in little activities once more, ones we hadn't done in years. A cup of coffee at the cafe, a stroll around the park with Ben, or simply viewing our favorite TV series from our younger years. When we were together, the past felt like a weighty, hovering presence. However, with every small act of connection, it began to feel more like the basis of something fresh. Carol also made it abundantly evident in the next weeks that she wanted to put in the effort with Ben rather than only with me. Though each day I saw her get more involved, asking Ben about his day, helping with his homework, and driving him to soccer games on the weekends, I remained wary, looking to see if this was a phase or if this was real. Witnessing her with him and the patience and love she showed him was almost like witnessing her at last fulfill the promise she had promised to herself and to us all those months before. She was turning up on a regular basis. For Ben, initially, it was not easy. In such a brief period of time, he had gone through so much change. He was not used to seeing his mother this way, open, involved, present. Still, I watched him soften with time. He began to bit by bit trust her once more. Carol seemed to truly listen to him. He had come home from school with a smile on his face, and his tales of friends and teachers spilled out without thinking twice. When I got home one day, Carol was reviewing his science assignment seated at the kitchen table with Ben. It was the first time I had seen Ben really smile like he used to when things were simpler. They were laughing together. It was a respite, a modest celebration. It felt for the first time that the three of us, Carol, Ben, and I, were building our own tiny version of normal. Though not flawless, it was real. And sufficient was also. Sitting down next to them, I watched the situation develop and knew how far we had come. Carol was becoming someone I could rely on once more, someone I could trust once more, not simply the person who had wounded me. And Ben, he was doing great. Though they were still there, the fissures in our family had less sharpness. Little by little, we were learning how to fix them. Carol and I sat on the balcony one evening after bedding Ben. It had evolved into our peaceful area, where we could converse free from the daily distractions, just the sound of crickets and the odd passing car. The evening was serene, calm, and for the first time we were not discussing regrets or past errors. Our conversation was only on the future. Carol remarked, her voice gentle, "I've been thinking about us, and I am aware of the considerable rebuilding we still have to accomplish. I still have plenty to show Ben, to prove. Still, I sense that right now we are on the correct road. I consider myself to be at last having the opportunity to be the kind of person I aspire to be." I nodded, the coziness of the moment creeping in. "I feel that too," I responded gently. "I know it's not easy, and I know there's a lot of work left to do, but I think we can get there." Carol stretched out her hand on mine. Though in that time it was everything, the gesture seemed basic. It was a promise of attempting, not of perfection, nor of the past being deleted. We were not giving up either, not anymore. "I want you to know that I'm not only doing this for us," she stated. "I am doing this for me as well, for Ben, for myself, the person I want to be. Though I know I have a long way to go, I am here. I'm primed." I turned to her then, genuinely turned to see something I hadn't seen in a very long time. Sincerity. These days it was action rather than simply words. Carol was changing. She required it for herself, not because I needed her to, and that made a difference everywhere. "I noticed that," I remarked, "and I believe you are already much farther than you could imagine, Dot." After that, we sat in silence, simply savoring the stillness and the sensation of sharing this moment. And I was not looking back, first in a long time. I was not obsessing over the past. Looking forward at what we might create from here. Though it would not be simple, it would be well worth it. Ben laughing in the living room woke me up the next morning. Instead of rushing out of bed, as I typically would have, I stopped to simply pay attention. I also could hear Carol's voice, soft and friendly. I had not realized until that point that I missed this sound. It was the sound of a family piecemeal returning together. Rising, I headed into the living room and found Carol and Ben seated on the floor working on a problem. Ben raised his head and smirked at me. "Mom and I are winning," he said proudly. I grinned and crossed over to the seat next to them. Ruffling his hair, I murmured, "You're doing great." Carol turned to face me, a subdued smile on her mouth. We had no more need to comment. Enough simply was to be here, united. And for the first time in a very long time, I thought we were at last headed in the correct direction.